Illustrator does more than just graphics, it does text too. In fact, sometimes text can be the most important part of the design you're working on. When it comes to creating and managing text in Illustrator, however, there's two important concepts or two different types of text that you could work with. There's something called point text, and then there's something called area text, and we'll deal with those two separately. For this movie, we're going to focus on using point text. Now I have this file open, it's called Basic Text. You'll find it in Chapter 6 of your exercise files. We'll actually use this file for the remainder of the chapter. I'll go over to my tool panel and I'll choose here the Type tool. The way that you create point text in Illustrator is you simply click and then release the mouse right away. Don't click and drag or anything else for that matter, and you'll see a blinking cursor on the screen. Now if you're coming from an application like InDesign, for example, or QuarkXPress, you may be familiar with the concept of creating a frame. You click and drag out to create a frame and your text is inside of a frame. Well here, my point text is not bound by anything. In reality, Illustrator does have the concept of a frame. That's what we'll talk about in the next movie when we learn about area text. But point text is not bound by anything except for the single point that you just created now wherever you clicked. And I'll actually show you where that exists as well. But for now, I just simply have this blinking cursor that I can put anywhere on my page. I'm going to start typing. Let's say I type in, let's say in all caps here, safety rules. Let's say we do that, some surfing safety rules. So now I have this text. Let's talk about some basic settings over here just to make it a little bit more apparent and working with it. If I go ahead and I press Control A or Command A, it will select all my text that I have right there. Alternatively, I can just use my regular arrow tool here and click on it to select it. And I'm going to do a few things. First of all, I'm going to go to the View menu and I'm going to basically hide the bounding box because I want you to focus on exactly what's happening here with the text, and that will become readily apparent in a moment. I'm also going to change the point size. Let's make this text a little bit bigger so we can see it, maybe around 60 points. There we go. Now it says safety rules, nice and clear. Let's take a look over here. I have this underline that appears underneath the words, safety rules. And then on the far left, I have this anchor point. Everything always comes down to those anchor points in Illustrator. Well, that anchor point is what defines this text, and that's really why this is called point text, is because that anchor point is where that text basically emanates from. It's important to realize that because should I decide that I want to align that text differently, again, that point is going to be the main, I guess you can say, point of contact with that text. For example, right now, if I look at my paragraph setting here in my control panel, I see that my text is aligned left. If I were to choose align center, watch what happens. The point, where the anchor point where I created the text, remains stationary, but the text becomes centered on that point. And if I align my text to the right, then you'll see that, again, the point remains stationary, but the text now aligns itself to the right, and basically that's why I have the alignment set that way. Let's go back to align left for a minute here, and that's just the important thing about understanding what point text is. Because there's no frame or there's nothing that encompasses this particular text, the text can go on forever. So for example, if I just type in safety rules for a wonderful, and notice that as I'm typing, my text just keeps going. It doesn't wrap at the end of the page. It keeps going on and on. That's because there's no bounds for this particular object. It will keep going until I type a return. For example, if I hit the return key or the enter key on my keyboard, I then get a second line. Summertime fun. I'm not making any sense with what I'm typing over here. But basically, I can go ahead and just add as many lines as I want to. We'll talk more about the settings for these in a moment. But that's how you create point text inside of Illustrator. I will tell you, let me actually delete this here so we can go back to safety rules here. Usually in Illustrator, the type of text that you'll create most often will be point text. If you're creating like a diagram and you want to have a little caption or a little bit of a call out, you probably use point text for that. It's easy to align them. For example, I know that my text is right now aligned to the left. I can grab that anchor point and snap it to anything else. And if I were to align it to the center, I can do it that way. Point text is probably used the most often. It's also the most simple to create. You just click anywhere and you start going. So that's how you create point text inside of Illustrator. Now that we understand that basic premise, let's move on to the other kind of text that exists inside of Illustrator, which is called area text.